Hey, it's Don, the auction professor here. Today I wanted to address a few questions that I do get quite often, at least several times a week, related to labor. Now, I've been asked many times, do I do VA, virtual assistants? Now, if you don't know what a VA is, a virtual assistant, you're basically hiring somebody you've probably never met, nor would you have a chance to meet, maybe someone even in another country, that will do all of the work via online means that they can from their location at a set amount of pay. There are companies that do this and companies that offer this. Again, I wouldn't recommend any personally because I've never used them. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using VAs. It's just not for me. We actually full-fledged employ everybody who works for us. They are under our tutelage, I guess you would say. They work directly with us here. And we have an accountant that does the payroll for us. Now, I could have done that myself. For us, it's just not worth the hassle, the risk to do the accounting aspect, the payroll aspect of it ourselves. So we did write that out to another company, a local accountant that does it for us. So that's the easiest way we have found because the people actually work for us. Now you can get a contracted employee and things along that line. There's several different options depending on where you're at. Now what most people would call it would be a 1099 employee, someone who basically has their own company or their own business entity, whether it's themselves or not, and then they'll work for somebody else. They have to report it and the whole works. Again, I don't like to do that. I would just rather pay them straight through and go about it that way. Now, I have to pay workman's comp and insurance and all of that kind of stuff as well. Now, if you pay $10 an hour to an employee, you can add about $1 more into taxes and fees to that hour. So it's $11 an hour. Not a huge difference there. Now, the cost you do pay obviously would depend on what minimum wage is in your state, what the accountant fees are that you have. We've wheeled and dealed to get our accountant. We only issue checks once a month. We do cash advances or an advance of some sort at the midpoint in the month. That way it's actually cheaper for us. We only have to file 1 day's worth of paperwork all at once that way, and it just records a cash advance on the employee's check. That was the cheapest, the lowest entry into this, and that allows us to have 12 employees. Now, we don't pay very much for this service. I think it's like $50 a month right now, just for that aspect, up to 12 employees. They're just throwing some numbers on a form in a computer. That's all they're doing for that. But if something happens, they're the ones who are going to have to report and deal with the issues. Their name is signed on it. It was paid and done through them. Any of the IRS payments I do for labor, anything like that, federal taxes, state taxes for the labor, all goes through the accountant. So that for us was the easiest way to do it. Other thoughts when I do this, when I hire somebody, I evaluate how much money I'm going to get out of their shift, their day, or whatever they're doing. If someone's doing photos or packing up, they technically aren't making any money for the long run scheme of things that way. So that's kind of like the eat it time there. Usually if somebody's taking photos, they'll take probably 5 or 6 hours worth of photos. At the end of the day, they may have taken thousands of photos. 2,500 is not absurd for that time frame, depending on what they're taking. Now, if they're scanning, they can scan 1,000 cards an hour, possibly, depending on, how long they've been here and how many cards they've scanned in their time. So you got to evaluate the aspect of how much labor you're going to actually get out of them. What I look at is when they're listing, how many items are going to sell while they're listing it. Perfect example, we've been going through sheet music lately, so I've been having several employees list big bulks of sheet music up. That's all they're doing for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. Usually what happens, and I'll use Evan, he's a new employee, he listed a bunch of sheet musics for a 4-hour time frame. He did something else the rest of the shift. So for 4 hours, he did nothing but list sheet music. We sold several while he was listing them, so at the end of the day, his labor was completely paid for. And that's literally what I look for almost every time to happen. So let's just shoot out an example. If an employee lists 100 items, they're usually going to sell at least 3 to 5% of those items right off the bat. 3 to 5 items will sell the same day they listed it. So now I don't sell cheaper items, so that's going to usually reimburse me immediately for the labor. The next day I'll sell a couple more, and then so on and so on and so on. They'll keep listing in the same manner for several days in a row, and then each day I'll be selling more as well as some from the prior day's list. And we keep going on this cycle over and over again. So at the end of the day, the items that we list are paid for probably 95% of the time. I sell enough the day that they list them to pay for their shift, their entire shift, whether they're doing a couple hours of photographs, 4 hours of listing, or whatever they may be doing. It is paid for like 95% of the time that night, the same night that they listed it. So it keeps going at the same level and the same route. And what also happens is usually these are bulk purchases. 1 or 2 sales after the labor is paid for will then cover all of the items that we have. So it's free items. They pay for themselves. Now I used to be really worried about labor and spending a lot of money for list costs, for photographing, for helping to mail and things along that line for the business. But in the long run, it always pays for itself, almost immediately, so there's really no loss in it. We've actually expanded. I did bring somebody else in. We have a new employee. It just fits right in with what we're doing because it's fourth quarter, so more and more stuff are selling right off the bat. It's a no-brainer for us, at least. Again, it doesn't matter how you do it if you're wanting labor, whether you go 1099, whatever you do, just don't pay under the table because then you can't account for the money that you're spending out for the labor. Just isn't practical to do that. Always do it legit. Always do it the right way. Get a business license, whatever that may be. In most states, even as a sole proprietor, you're allowed to have employees. So just because it says sole proprietor on there does not mean that you can't have employees. Look it up. Most states are that way. In Ohio, we started as a sole proprietor. I was able to have employees. Now, a 1099 employee technically isn't working for you. They're working for themselves as, say, a contractor, and you're contracting out their service. So that's a little bit different, and then they have to file it. I, again, would not recommend that personally. Now, for me, I don't like to do any of that. Again, as I said, it's all in-house. I can control what goes on. I can make sure the quality's a certain way. I can address an issue. There's only certain things you can do with the VA as well, in my personal opinion. When I price things here, I've got to put notes on many of them on keywords to use and things along that line for those who don't know. So if I'm using a VA, I'll be uploading photos to a online source like Dropbox or something like that, and they won't have any of the items to actually look at, so there's a good chance that something's missed as well. But those listing here actually have the item in front of them. That's key for antiques, because if something's damaged or rip or tear that doesn't show up in a photo, it's going to be missed on the listing, and at the end of the day, it could be sold and a customer would be upset about it. I don't have any issues with the employees. We've had employees for, 3+ years, I think, at this point. And it hasn't hurt us at all, as I said. You've just got to weigh that in. Now, if you start bringing a bunch of labor and you're not paying for it by having them list or do something along that line that's going to generate revenue, then you do have an issue possibly. So you can only throw out so much labor cost without recouping, something back from it. As I've said, too, we do sell a ton of items, so we pretty much always pay for our labor. You're going to have to decide on what's best for you. Now, if you're doing new items and you've got files and photos of things that there isn't much to determine on condition or anything like that, you could upload a bunch of photos and pay a VA to list those for you with whatever criteria. You can set up a template or whatever you want to do with that. There are many options for that. They can source for you in some cases in different cities or countries even, for that matter. They could even do mailing for you from like warehouses and things, have stuff shipped to them, and all kinds of other issues. There is risk involved with some of that. Even with the standard VA, there is a risk of that. I know eBay now does allow you to have sub-accounts tied to it as your employees, but there are always risks no matter what you're doing with that. Again, I have them in-house. I double-check behind them. It's just the easiest way for me to dictate how my business runs and what happens with it. I can control my costs. I know that the labor is getting done on proper standpoint. I don't have to worry about any other issues. We pay the insurance or any other government fee that we need to pay. Again, licenses, accountants, and the whole works. It's filed quarterly, just like you would expect for anything else also. So That's just a touch on labor. The one thing I can tell you, when I personally added people to my staff, employees, we have increased our sales from that point on. It has made my life easier. It has allowed us to get a lot more items up. It would be almost impossible to say get 50, 60, 70,000 individual items up without some sort of help or years and years of doing this. Because again, I do other things than just list items. So, well, there you are. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell a friend.